Some loads are heavier than others, and I'm not just talking about what the scales say at the weigh station. You can have 40 tons of steel pulling your back, fighting you on every incline, and it feels like nothing. And then you can have an empty trailer, and the weight of your own thoughts, the weight of the road itself, can feel like it's going to press you right through the asphalt. This job, it's a lonely one. You've got the hum of the engine for a companion, the endless ribbon of highway for a view, and the voices on the CB for a choir. But mostly, it's just you and the dark. This particular run started like any other. I was in Kansas City picking up a shipment of precision-milled industrial parts. Big, heavy things, cradled in custom-built wooden crates, all headed for a tech plant down in Dallas. The air in the KC yard was thick with the smell of diesel and hot metal. I oversaw the loading, made sure everything was strapped down tight. You don't want a 2-ton piece of machinery doing a dance in your trailer when you hit a pothole outside of Tulsa. Everything checked out. Paperwork signed, seals in place. It was just me and about 1,000 miles of road ahead. The sun was starting to dip low, painting the sky in those bruised colors of orange and purple you only get out on the plains. I've always found that time of day to be the loneliest. The world is heading home, lights are coming on in houses, families are sitting down to dinner, and you're just starting your workday. A ghost in a metal shell, watching it all slide by your window. I figured I'd get 100 miles or so under my belt before pulling over for the night's first dose of caffeine. There was a little truck stop, one of those places that probably hasn't changed since the 70s. The sign was a flickering neon thing, a coffee cup with steam rising from it. Half the lights burnt out so it looked like it was winking at you. I pulled the rig around back, the air brakes hissing in the quiet twilight. Inside, it smelled of stale coffee, bacon grease, and pine saw. I poured myself a large black coffee in a styrofoam cup that felt too flimsy for the heat. As I was paying, I saw him. He was standing just outside the door, hesitating, shoulders hunched against the wind that wasn't there. He looked young, maybe 18, 19 at the most. He had on a thin jacket, the kind that wouldn't do you much good in a real cold snap, and jeans that were worn, but clean. He had that look about him, the look of someone trying to get somewhere with no real way of doing it. He wasn't ragged, not like some of the guys you see looking for a ride. He looked decent, just out of luck. When I stepped outside, he looked up, and his eyes had a kind of desperate hope in them. "Sir, you heading south on the 35? I said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, just how I like it. "Any chance I could catch a ride? Just a ways. I'm trying to get to a town called Rock Creek. It's about 100 miles down the road." He shuffled his feet. "My girl's there. I need to see her." I looked over him. The company has rules. No riders. Insurance, liability, all that. You let someone in your cab, you're taking a risk. But I looked at his face, and he just seemed like a kid. A decent kid in a tight spot, trying to get to his girl. The loneliness of the road was pressing in on me. The silence of the cab waiting for me. Having someone to talk to for a couple hours, well, sometimes that's worth the risk. "All right," I sighed. "Hop in, but no smoking, and if I get tired of you, you're walking." A smile broke out on his face, and it was like a light came on. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." He climbed up into the passenger seat, moving with a kind of carefulness, like he was sore. I figured he'd been sleeping rough. As I pulled the big rig back onto the access road and merged with the river of headlights on the interstate, the weight in the cab felt a little lighter. For a little while, at least. It wouldn't just be me and the dark. We settled into the easy rhythm of the road. The initial awkwardness that comes with sharing a small space with a stranger faded away, replaced by the low rumble of the diesel engine and the soft glow of the dashboard lights. For a while, we just sat in a comfortable silence, watching the world streak by. I find you can learn a lot about a person from the way they handle silence. Some people get fidgety, feel the need to fill every empty moment with noise. This kid, though, he just watched the road, a calm look on his face, as if the motion of the truck was exactly where he was supposed to be. "So, what's your name?" I finally asked, breaking the quiet. James, he said, turning to look at me. James Miller. Well, James, what's in Rock Creek that's so important you're hitching rides in the dark to get there? He smiled, a soft, almost sad smile. My girlfriend, Sarah. I haven't seen her in a few weeks, too long. I promised I'd get back to her. There was an earnestness in his voice, a simple sincerity that you don't hear much anymore. It was all about the girl. At that age, it usually is. She know you're coming? Not exactly, he admitted, looking down at his hands. It's a surprise. I just need to see her. Make sure she's okay. We talked for a while after that, just small talk mostly. He asked about trucking, what it was like being on the road all the time. I told him it had its ups and downs, the freedom of the open highway, the beauty of a sunrise over the Rockies, but also the crushing loneliness, the greasy food, the days away from home. He listened intently, nodding in all the right places. He was a good listener. He told me a little about himself. He'd been working a construction job, saving up to get a place with Sarah. He talked about her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. The way her hair caught the light, the sound of her laugh. He wasn't bragging, he was just stating facts. The way you'd say the sky is blue or the sun is hot. It was sweet, in a way. Reminded me of being young. Then he mentioned the accident. It came out of nowhere, dropped into the conversation so casually it almost didn't register. I was in a bit of a car wreck a few weeks back. That's why I'm in such a hurry to get back. Things got complicated after that. A bad one? He nodded slowly. Yeah, it was pretty bad. A guy ran a red light, T-boned me. I don't remember much of it, just a lot of noise, and then it was real quiet. He paused, and for a moment the only sound was the whine of the tires on the pavement. I rubbed his arms like he was cold, though the cab was warm. I cranked the heat up a little higher anyway. I didn't think much of it at the time. A kid gets into a bad wreck, he's gonna be shaken up. It made sense that he'd be feeling off, that he'd be desperate to get back to the one solid thing in his life, his girl. It explained why he was sore, why he seemed a little fragile. We kept driving, the miles melting away under our wheels. The conversation drifted to other things, music, movies, the best and worst states to drive through. But in the back of my mind, a little seed of unease had been planted. There was something in the way he talked about the accident, a hollowness in his voice, an echo of that real quiet place he had mentioned. It was a strange note in an ordinary conversation, a hint of a shadow in the warm light of the cab. The landscape outside had flattened into an endless dark plain, the kind of country where the sky feels huge and the world feels empty. The only signs of life were the occasional pair of headlights passing in the other direction, a fleeting connection that was gone in an instant. Inside the cab, the easy conversation had dried up. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, not at first. It was just quiet. James had fallen back into watching the road, but his posture had changed. He seemed more rigid, more focused on the darkness ahead than before. I was starting to feel the miles myself, that familiar dull ache behind the eyes. I took a long pull from my now lukewarm coffee. So this town, Rock Creek, I said, trying to get the conversational ball rolling again. It's a nice place? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The youthful energy was gone, replaced by something heavier, more contemplative. It's a place, he said softly, a place where things are supposed to make sense, where you have a history, where people know you. He turned his head and looked at me, and in the dim green and orange glow of the dashboard, his eyes seemed incredibly old. Do you ever feel like you're just passing through everywhere? Like you're a ghost? The question hung in the air between us. It was a hell of a question for a kid his age. It was a question I'd asked myself 1,000 times in 1,000 different truck stops in the dead of 1,000 different nights. It's the job, I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. You're always just passing through. No, it's more than that, he insisted, his voice barely a whisper. "It's like, what if you got stuck? Stuck between places. Not here, but not there either. You're on the road, but you never arrive. You just keep traveling." I shot him a sideways glance. "That's some heavy thinking for a Tuesday night, kid." He didn't smile. He just kept looking at me with those ancient eyes. "After the accident, I started having these dreams. Or maybe I'm not dreaming. I see things, places I know, but they're wrong. The colors are faded. There's no sound. And I see Sarah, but she can't see me. I'm right there, shouting her name, but she just looks right through me, like I'm not there at all." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't just a kid shaken up from a wreck anymore. There was a profound, bone-deep strangeness to what he was saying. It was the kind of talk you hear from men who've spent too long staring into the abyss, not from an 18-year-old trying to get to his girlfriend. The easy, comfortable atmosphere in the cab had completely evaporated. Now it was tight, charged like the air before a lightning strike. "Kid, that's just trauma," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The mind plays tricks on you after a shock like that. It'll pass. Once you see your girl, you'll feel grounded again." "I hope so," he whispered, turning back to the windshield. "I just want to go home." But the way he said home, it didn't sound like a town. It sounded like a memory, like a place he wasn't sure he could ever get back to. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, the darkness outside more complete. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. For the first time on the trip, I felt a genuine sense of unease. The road ahead was long, and suddenly, I wasn't so sure I wanted to know where it was leading. The intrigue wasn't just about the kid's story anymore. It was about the kid himself. Something was deeply wrong here, and I had voluntarily locked myself in a 2-ton steel box with it. The highway stretched on, a monotonous gray ribbon under the moonless sky. We'd passed the 90-minute mark, meaning we should be getting close to his turnoff for Rock Creek. But the strangeness James had introduced into the cab lingered and thickened, like a fog creeping in through the vents. The easy chatter was a distant memory. Now there was just the hum of the engine and the weight of his words. I tried to bring things back to solid ground. "You mentioned that accident," I said, keeping my tone even. "What happened exactly, if you don't mind talking about it? Maybe if he talked it through, laid out the facts, it would chase some of the ghosts away, for him and for me." He was quiet for a long time. I thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, his voice flat and detached, as if he were reciting a story he'd heard about someone else. "It was a Tuesday afternoon, just a few weeks ago. I had just gotten paid, cashed a check. I bought a ring. Nothing fancy, you know, just a little silver thing with a blue stone, Sarah's favorite color. I was going to see her, give it to her, ask her to make it official." He paused, and I could hear the phantom sound of a blinker in the silence, a rhythmic tick-tock from a moment that was gone. I was at that intersection, by the old water tower, just on the edge of my hometown. The light turned green. I remember looking at the little velvet box on the passenger seat next to me. I was thinking about what I'd say to her, how she would smile. His breathing hitched, just for a second. I never saw the truck. The police report said he blew through the red light doing 60, a big red dump truck. They said I wouldn't have had time to even react. He turned his head slowly from the window to look at me. But that's the strange thing. I do remember it. I remember it all. I remember the sound like the world was being torn in half. And I remember seeing the driver's face. He was young, scared. Just for a second. He stopped again. I didn't say anything. I just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. And then, he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, I remember a feeling of floating. It didn't hurt. That's what everyone asks. But it didn't. It was just quiet. So quiet. All the noise of the world just stopped, and there was this bright, bright light. Not like a headlight. It was everywhere. It felt warm. It felt like home. He looked down at his hands in his lap. I thought I was dead. I was sure of it. But then I woke up. I was on the side of the road, and people were running towards the wreck. But they weren't looking at me. They were looking at the car. It was like I was invisible. I tried to talk to a paramedic, but he walked right through me. Just walked right through me. My blood ran cold. The cab, which had felt warm just an hour ago, now felt like a meat locker. I glanced at him. He looked solid. He was sitting there, a physical presence in the passenger seat. This was insane. He was just a kid in shock, his mind weaving fantasies to cope with the trauma. He had to be. Kid, James, that's not possible. You're here. You're sitting right here. He looked at me, and his face was filled with a desperate, heartbreaking confusion. Am I here? He asked, his voice cracking. Because I don't feel like I'm here. I feel cold all the time. I'm hungry, but I can't eat. I'm so tired, but I can't sleep. The only thing I know, the only thing I've been holding on to is that I have to get to Sarah. I have to see her. If I can just see her, maybe this'll all stop. Maybe I'll be real again. The story hung in the air, a chilling, impossible tale. I was a practical man. I believed in engines and asphalt and the weight of a load. I didn't believe in ghosts. But as I looked at the lost, tormented kid sitting beside me, I could feel the solid ground of my own reality starting to crumble. We were deep in the heart of the country, surrounded by nothing but darkness. And I was driving with a story that didn't belong in the world I knew. The silence that followed his story was absolute. It was a dense, heavy thing, far more profound than the mere absence of talk. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the cab, leaving only the drone of the engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I kept my eyes glued to the road, to the twin beams of my headlights cutting a path through the oppressive dark. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to a story like that? You crazy? It was just a dream? Every rational explanation I could grasp felt flimsy and insulting in the face of the genuine anguish in his voice. We drove on like that for what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes? 15? The mile marker slipped by, ghostly white sentinels in the night. The sign for the Rock Creek exit was coming up in about 5 miles. I knew I should say something, break the tension. My throat was dry. We're getting close now, I managed to croak out. It sounded loud and clumsy in the stillness. There was no response. James? I asked, a little louder this time. I kept my eyes on the road, thinking maybe he'd finally drifted off to sleep. The poor kid was exhausted, that much was clear. His story, the trauma, it would be enough to wear anyone out. It's just up here on the right, I continued, talking more to myself than to him. I'll pull off and you can show me where to drop you. Still nothing. Just the unrelenting hum of the Peterbilt. A prickle of unease ran up the back of my neck. It was one thing to be quiet, another to be completely non-responsive. I risked a quick glance to my right. The passenger seat was empty. My mind refused to process it for a second. I looked back at the road, then did a hard double take, my head snapping back to the right. The seat was vacant. The seat belt was retracted, lying flat against the worn fabric. There was no indentation on the cushion. It was as if no one had ever been there. My heart hammered against my ribs. "James!" I yelled, my voice cracking. The sound was swallowed by the cab. I stomped on the brakes, much harder than I should have. The rig groaned and shuddered, the tires screaming in protest as the heavy load shifted behind me. I wrestled the wheel, keeping the truck from jackknifing as I swerved onto the shoulder, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. The air brakes engaged with a final, deafening hiss. And then there was silence. A true, ringing silence. My breath came in ragged gasps. My eyes darted around the cab. The door was closed, locked from the inside, just as it had been. I twisted in my seat, yanking back the curtain to the sleeper berth. It was empty. A neatly made bunk, my duffel bag, nothing else. He couldn't have jumped. I would have heard the door. I would have felt the change in air pressure. Even at highway speeds, you'd notice something like that. And out here, there was nothing, just flat, empty fields on either side of the interstate, stretching into a black horizon. No lights, no buildings, nowhere to go. No, 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 I muttered, running a shaky hand over my face. My skin was cold and clammy. I was losing my mind. That had to be it. I'd fallen asleep. I'd had a micro-sleep, one of those things they warn you about, and I dreamt the whole thing. The kid, the conversation, the story about the accident. A vivid, terrifying dream brought on by exhaustion and too much bitter coffee. I sat there for a long time, the engine idling, the hazard lights pulsing, painting the dark cab in rhythmic flashes of orange. I tried to force the rational explanation to fit. A dream, a hallucination, but it had felt so real. His voice, his story, the chill that had settled in the cab. I could still feel it. The memory was too sharp, too detailed. I slowly, deliberately, reached over and touched the passenger seat. It was cold, stone cold, as if it had been empty all night long.
Leaving that spot on the shoulder of I-35 was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to wait for the sun, to call the police. Though what I would have told them I had no idea. I lost a ghost? They'd have me in a padded cell before the coffee got cold. But I couldn't stay there. I had a load to deliver. Dallas was still hundreds of miles away. My job, my life, was about forward motion. So I took a deep, shuddering breath, put the truck in gear, and eased back onto the highway, leaving the empty stretch of road behind me. But he was still there. Not in the seat, but in my head. The rest of the drive was a special kind of hell. The cab, which had felt lonely before, now felt haunted. It was actively, malevolently empty. The silence was a living thing pressing in on me. Every shadow cast by my headlights seemed to take on a human form at the edge of my vision. Every flicker of light in my peripheral was him, about to reappear. I turned on the radio, desperate for another human voice, but the tinny country music and the manic chatter of the DJs just felt wrong, an intrusion on the sacred, terrifying quiet he had left behind. I turned it off again. My mind raced, turning over and over what had happened, trying to find a seam, a flaw in the memory that would allow me to dismiss it. Had I been that tired? I'd felt fine. I'd had a full night's sleep before starting the run. Was it the coffee? Just regular truck stop sludge. I went over the conversation again and again. His name, James Miller. The town, Rock Creek. The girl, Sarah. The details of the accident, the red dump truck, the feeling of floating, the bright light, the paramedics walking right through him. It was all so vivid, so specific. Too specific for a dream. Dreams are foggy around the edges. This was crystal clear. I could still hear the soft, desperate tone of his voice. I could still see the ancient sadness in his young eyes. I fought a constant battle with my own sanity. One minute I was convinced I had experienced something real, something impossible and supernatural that defied all the laws of the world I knew. The next, I was certain I was having a breakdown, that the long years of solitude on the road had finally caused something in my brain to snap. Maybe this is how it starts. You start seeing things, talking to people who aren't there. The next thing you know, you're one of those guys you see at the truck stops, shouting at the sky. When the first hint of dawn began to bleed into the eastern sky, it was like being released from a prison sentence. The gray light slowly pushed back the shadows, giving shape and form to the world again. The terror of the night didn't vanish, but it receded, like a tide going out, leaving behind a thick residue of dread and confusion. I delivered the load in Dallas in a complete haze. I moved on autopilot, unstrapping the cargo, getting the paperwork signed, my mind a million miles away on a dark stretch of highway in Oklahoma. The foreman at the plant must have thought I was drunk or sick. I barely said 2 words, just nodded and signed where I was told. As soon as the trailer was empty, I found the nearest motel that had truck parking, paid for a room, and collapsed onto the cheap, stiff bed, not even bothering to take my boots off. I needed to sleep. I needed to reset my brain. But as I closed my eyes, all I could see was an empty passenger seat and a pair of sad, searching eyes in the dashboard light.
I woke up a few hours later, but I didn't feel rested. The room was stale with the smell of old cigarette smoke and bleach. The sunlight filtering through the thin, grimy curtains did nothing to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The events of the night before didn't feel like a dream. They felt like a memory, sharp and jagged. I couldn't shake it. I had to know. I showered, put on a fresh shirt, and walked over to the truck stop next to the motel. There was a little store inside that sold the usual assortment of snacks, souvenirs, and newspapers. My heart was pounding as I scanned the rack. I found what I was looking for, a small regional paper from that part of Oklahoma, the Rock Creek Chronicle. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely pull a copy from the stack. I took it back to a booth in the diner section and ordered a coffee I didn't want. I let the paper sit on the table for a moment, afraid of what I might find, and even more afraid of what I wouldn't. If there was nothing, then I was crazy. If there was something, then the world was crazier than I had ever imagined. With a deep breath, I opened it. I skipped the front page, the local sports, the farm reports. My eyes scanned for the one section I needed to see, the obituaries. And there he was. The picture was a high school portrait, a black and white photo of a smiling, hopeful young man. His hair was a little neater and he didn't have the weariness in his eyes I'd seen, but it was him, unmistakably him. James Miller, age 18. My blood turned to ice water. I forced myself to read the text below. James Jimmy Miller, 18, of Rock Creek, passed away tragically on Tuesday, October 15th, following a vehicular accident at the intersection of Highway 77 and Old Mill Road. He was a beloved son, a loyal friend, and was devoted to his loving girlfriend, Sarah. He was a kind soul who will be missed by all who knew him. October 15th, 3 weeks ago, just like he'd said. I read the lines over and over, the cheap newsprint blurring through the tears welling in my eyes. The accident he'd mentioned, it hadn't just been bad, it had been fatal. The whole time he was sitting next to me, telling me his story, he was already gone. He just never knew. He was stuck on the road, trying to complete that final journey, trying to get back to his girl. I finally understood the weight of his words, the profound sadness that clung to him. He wasn't just telling me a story about a car wreck. He was telling me the story of his own death, trying to make sense of a truth he hadn't yet accepted. He wasn't looking for a ride to Rock Creek. He was looking for an anchor, for something real in a world that had become a foggy, soundless dream. He was looking for someone to hear him. I left the newspaper on the table, paid for my coffee, and walked out into the bright, indifferent Texas sun. The weight of my empty trailer was nothing. It was the other weight, the phantom weight in the passenger seat, that I knew I would carry with me from then on. Some loads are heavier than others. I know that for a fact, because I once gave a ghost a ride for 100 miles, and his desperate need to get home is a weight I'll carry for the rest of my days on this long, lonely road.